Hi, I'm Dan Cooper. This is 3 Minutes on the Dot. And today we're going to jump straight into our chat with our guest. So we've got Wez Allard, who is a sound designer and composer. Hey, Wez.
Hey Dan, how's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very, very good. Very good. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to focus on exactly what you do. So the big question for this week is, how do you build a world via audio design? Let's focus specifically on the Encounters project that we worked together on for the National World War One Museum and Memorial. But let's start with a broad question. So how can sound design as a whole, taking into account both composition, sound effects, etc., how can that help with this idea of building these worlds?
So, so Dan, for me, world building through sound is about creating a space that feels emotionally and physically believable. So, with Encounters, when a visitor comes along to the exhibit, they feel the sound before they're even consciously aware of it, if that makes sense. So, and I think with Encounters as well, rather than treating each film in isolation, it's more of a kind of a shared sort of emotional landscape that they walk through. So where like music, atmosphere, all those human details can all like coexist and come together. So it's like a living world, and the audience or the visitors, they're not only just having like an insight into history, but they can feel immersed within it, and they can feel it, and they can take home with them, their own emotional connection.
I really liked your answer there around making the world believable. Tell me a bit
Hmm.
about that in terms of like the authenticity of the sound design.
Yeah, so I think my aim was never to like over define it, over engineer it, create enough sensory detail to obviously make the world feel inhabited, but also be true to the stories that these people going through this crazy time in World War One, amazing stories that for us, it's so hard to comprehend what they did, but to the intent of what they're trying to tell us, to convey that authentically through sound design in the most honest way we can, and to give them that space to breathe and that space to have that moment to tell these such important messages.
When we've got such a variety of different worlds within that space, and we've got different landscapes, we've got technology like U-boats, we've got machinery, we've got warfare, and then we've got peaceful scenes as well. How does your job differ for, let's say a scene in the trenches versus a scene in a, beautiful garden?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose probably the best place to start was James McConnell was the first story we looked into, and he had such a descriptive nature about everything he was describing so precisely. So I really wanted to honor that through the sound design. What's I think resonated well with me was when he said it was a weird combination of stillness and havoc, right? And that that really set the tone, I think, for the whole project, because I felt like that stillness represents that humanity he had. His putting his uniform on, getting ready for war calmly, but it's like a ritualistic thing to him. Something really human about that. And the havoc is like the machinery of war, this unstoppable force. So that light and shade, that humanity versus the machinery, humanity versus war, it was important to have that balance. I think if we look at, for example, there's another story where a man is sitting under a tree. He's writing a letter to his wife. Tomorrow there's going to be cavalry sort of attack, and he's likely not going to survive. And he's writing a letter to say goodbye. And he's sitting under a tree. You can hear the gentle breeze of the winds, the rustling through the leaves, the crinkling of the paper that he's holding. And I really had to choose restraints, I think, in the sound design there, because the emotional event wasn't the coming battle. It was the act of writing that final letter. That was what was important there. So I wanted the audience to feel that peace that he had reached within himself through creating a space of natural elements like the bird song and the wind and the calm breeze, and to feel that weight that he was going to be sacrificing, that he was willing to sacrifice. Then in the factory, we had a woman working in a munitions factory in London, and she's talking very candidly, very frankly about her day-to-day working life in this factory, which was very dangerous. But she's talking about it so just matter of fact. So the machinery had to be there. It was this like metronome of war in the background behind her, but it had to also give her that space to tell what she wanted. And it was just, to her, just another day. And how brave is that, that she can speak about something so frankly, despite how difficult her life would have been. And then if we look at Patrick, Patrick was a young English schoolboy, and he saw a Zeppelin crash into a field outside his house, which is an insane experience. I can't imagine what that would be like to really see that. But obviously we need to try and tell that. But I think what was really interesting about Patrick's story is that we had the opportunity to tell it through the lens of a child. So we could do it through the perception of, through his eyes. So rather than going full blown into the spectacle of the drama and the chaos, we needed to kind of show maybe he didn't quite understand, that it was maybe not fully tangible to him what was happening. I know we did a lot of back and forth to kind of get that balance, and that was really good how we worked together on finding that. We still had those moments of sort of shock and awe, but also that stillness where we could really ground it and we don't have to go too intense. That stillness could be so powerful. What I really liked about Patrick's, and we did this with a few other films as well, where we used a grandfather clock for the beginning and the ending. It was such a powerful like narrative device. And then after, it's almost like two bookends on a bookshelf, this grandfather clock sound. And then the soundscape evolves and blends in as Patrick is describing it. It's like he's painting that soundscape through his story. And it was really important that it felt like it was a memory being recalled in a world that was real. And I think we really nailed that. Then there was Clarence. He was returning to New York after the war. But I think emotionally he was suspended in this kind of limbo of the life he left behind and the person that war had made him. And he said, we left as boys and returned as old men. Either people felt older than their years or aged, looked older than they were. And with this film, we were really lucky to be able to use the music Home Sweet Home, which carries like real deep emotional resonance. During the American Civil War, that song became a symbol of nostalgia and it resonated with soldiers and everyday people. So it's a really significant piece. But because the music already carried all that weight, I thought my role was to create space for it to breathe, space for his performance, space for his words. So the sound design is intentionally restrained, but you can hear all those tiny little details that are so subtle, yet they're so powerful, and there's much clarity. And I think when he's standing in the city street and he's returned to his home, but it's now an unfamiliar place, I feel like we really kind of sold that, through not just the audio, the visual audio, the whole thing as a package. It just, and working on that really hit me emotionally a lot. Like it was hard to work on that one. And as things developed, it just really got to me in such a powerful way. We have Melville. He was a Black American man and of a New York Infantry Brigade. I think it was the 15th. He was marching into a French town. The German troops are retreating. They're leaving. But he says that day the sun was shining, where the band is playing and we're marching. And he was so positive and proud of what he's doing. And for someone to find light in such dark times and stay so positive, that's, wow, that's so powerful. So the sound design really had to celebrate that. It was almost a celebration. I think there was, emotionally, it still hits home, but it's also showing that there was light in the darkness. And I think coming back to that whole stillness and havoc, that humanity versus the machine of war, again, we're kind of referencing that again. So yeah, and I think that's something that every film, we took a slightly different approach, but we had to be authentic and true to the stories that these people wanted to tell.
It's really nice to hear you describing the word that you did there. Mostly these pieces are combinations of sound effects built up to create this world, but when you articulate putting them together, a lot of the terminology you're talking about in terms of structure, in terms of the cadence, etc., it feels like you're describing a musical piece, right, that you composed.
Yes, it feels like that, and I think quite often the visuals can write the sound, but I think more so with Encounters, I think it was these people's stories, these moments, these short extracts from diaries from these real people. That was foundation to everything, and that I think through the visuals and the audio, the actor's performance, everything, it was all about being authentic and true to not just the story they told, but how they wanted to tell that story and what their intent was.
And how do you ensure that that authenticity can be there when I'm challenging you to create sounds that we don't have any natural recordings of?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting challenge. There was like very limited authentic field recordings from World War One, and there was no tape technology. Then there was some very rare disc recordings. So yeah, that was a real challenge. So I think instead of relying on archival sounds that we can retrieve, we had to be more, but to interpret things, focus more on the emotional authenticity, like rather than like a literal reconstruction. At the same time, I think we had to be mindful that sound effects used were appropriate. For example, in a factory, you couldn't have power tools and things sort of whirling away. It had to be true and real. With the propellers of the biplanes, the engines, we had to use sound design to kind of approximate and recreate the sounds that those planes would have made without having those actual recordings. So, and even some of the old music we were able to use, they're on such scratchy recordings, cleaning those up to make them more audible. So there's a bit of artistic licensing, but I think the authenticity really lied in selling that emotion that was true, but being as close as we possibly can to the real world at the same time.
And one challenge we had in terms of the environmental design was we've got these 16 individual stories that all have their own sound world, but then we've got a central theme within the space that evokes a time and a place as people enter the gallery. How did you find that challenge of creating these individual pieces that have to coexist together and become one big audio world?
Yeah, so the central audio piece, that was just under 10 minutes, loops, and it's like a shared emotional canvas of the exhibition space. It's slow and evolving, and it's intentionally very abstract. And it is like an atmospheric foundation for everything. And I said about people moving through one emotional landscape rather than having separate moments, it kind of cohesively brings everything together into one world. And it needs to obviously fit with with that world and all of those stories and not compete with them. For the musical instruments, we use different colors. We use strings, woodwind, brass, synths, lots of like slow evolving sounds. And we use sound design like footsteps, distant engines, artillery, breathing, the static of radios, and all these things are blending in and out. And I think what was nice about it is that it was like a shared sonic environment where nothing was isolated. They all came together into that space. And I think by everything being connected with that, it allows the visitors to feel like they are part of those memories of World War One.
And I've got a question. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it. In my mind, when I'm sort of exec producing these pieces, I see each of them almost like an individual song structurally. So each of them sort of has some degree of an intro. It has sort of like a real standout moment. There
Mm-hmm.
might be repeated divides in there. Some of them even had like the cadence and a beat to
Mm-hmm.
them, and then they need to wrap up. And I sort of try and apply that to all levels of production, visually as well as the audio. Is that something? Because obviously, for other projects, you've composed really beautiful musical pieces for us, and you did for the central theme for Encounters as well. But when you're just piecing together individual bits of sound effects, is that sort of a conscious thought for you as well in terms of that structural piece?
Yeah, I think so. It's different, but I think quite often with music, as well as having individual different notes, different melodies, different chord progressions, etc., that can carry different emotion. You've also got the color of the music in different instruments have different colors, different textures. And I think I really leaned into that. So with the sound design, having these different textures, these different beats, these different rhythms, it almost felt like, yeah, like writing a piece of music through sound design, which I think is quite a novel experience for me. I've experimented with things like that maybe many years ago, but to do it at this scale for this project was very experimental. But I think also having those sound effects with it allowed to have that kind of cohesion with the exhibits, because you'd hear the playing and go, oh, James McConnell, he was in that alcove over there. And then you might hear the sound of, I don't know, the sort of water and crackling and sort of bangs it outside of a submarine, or the sound of the wind, or the et cetera, et cetera. So I felt like it was almost a nod to something you've just seen, and you might hear something that you just heard in the previous thing, and you might hear something that you haven't heard in one of the films yet. And you think, oh, I wonder what that's for. So I don't know, I hope it kind of gave the visitors that kind of wonder of, oh, I've just experienced that, and that's reinforcing that memory, or what is that, and the excitement of what is around the corner, and just that intrigue and that sort of chance for discovery.
Final question then.
Mhm.
In terms of delivering the project, what surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most is how much power there is in those subtle moments. Silence can be louder than noise sometimes, and we did use that for some of the films. And also having that silence and then having something that follows doesn't need to be so loud. It can be so much more impactful from that contrast. And I think also just having those little sound effects from the smallest things that are happening in that scene, but they can also be so clear and so tangible. But often those things you wouldn't normally hear, but that can like sometimes resonate more with the stories that these people were telling. Yeah, I think the power of less is more, the power of silence and the power of subtlety. Yeah, really surprised me, and this was a real chance to explore that in encounters.
It's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, Wes. And that's been 3 minutes on the dot.
Thanks, Dan. Nice seeing you. Take care.